Hello, and welcome to Books to Last, the podcast that challenges readers to pick the only 5 books they may take with them when cast away to a mystery remote location. As ever, I'm joined by a book loving guest, and this episode, I'm joined by Rory. Welcome, Rory. It's so great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I've always wanted to be introduced on a podcast, so that's really like a life goal ticked off.
I'm so glad that we can help you make that dream a reality.
Yeah.
For the benefit of any listeners who might not be familiar with you and what you do, could you just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you and books?
Yeah, I mean, I was always a big reader as a kid, as a teenager. There is famously a story of me crying as a child because I was the only one in the family who didn't know how to read yet. So I've always been a big reader. And I think I really fell off for a couple of years and basically read about 5 books over the course of nearly a decade until the beginning of this year when I got back into it. And now I'm very rarely without a book in my hands. So it's been a real turnaround, and I've really found that love for reading again in the last year. That's pretty much where I'm at.
That's so exciting. I know, because I know loads of people, even like really big readers, always tend to go through their little reading
Yeah.
lull where it disappears. Usually it's connected in some way to higher education, almost invariably.
Almost definitely when I stopped reading was when I was forced to at uni. Yeah. It kills it a little bit.
Yeah, it can be difficult to fit it in alongside all of the forced reading that you
Yeah.
made to do.
Yeah.
What was the last great book that you read, or what are you reading at the moment that's really good?
I actually finished last night. I finished reading My Husband, which I want to say is by Maud Ventura, which is a very short book that is just about a woman who is completely obsessed with her husband to a really unsettling degree. And it was just like everyone in that book had bad vibes, but I really loved it. I was obsessed with how terrible everything about that story was. It was a great time.
Yeah, that feels like very much your vibe from what I know about your reading
Yeah.
habits. I'm expecting some interesting books.
Yeah. I might disappoint. I don't know. We'll see.
I mean, always good for the mind-bending, spooky, unsettling undertones.
Yeah. If the
Is
vibes are off, I'm probably all in.
Okay, as mentioned before, you are going to pick the only 5 books you can take with you when cast away forever, but you don't have to go to a desert island if that's not where you want to be cast away to. Where would you like to be cast away?
It's okay. See, you've told me this several times that it doesn't need to be a desert island. But unfortunately, my brain has just gone straight to desert island. But I've tried to make it a little bit nicer for myself. I've got a little beach house, I think. It is a desert island. I am the only one there, but I have a beach house. I have my amenities. And I think will become quite clear with my book. I do love the ocean. So a desert island is a pretty good place for me, really.
That's fine then. If you're into the sea and you don't mind the beach, I think a desert island's a good shout for you.
Yeah.
I'm terrified of the sea and hate sand with a burning passions. And it's not really my happy place, but
No,
I respect
no,
other
it's not
people's love
like
for the beach.
it's, yeah, I mean, in that case, I don't recommend a lot of my favorite books, but yeah, I do love the sea and I do love sand. I'm not an Anakin Skywalker. I do love sand, so I'm all good.
Yeah, see, that's the funny thing though. I actually quite like reading about beaches and I like reading about it. I just don't like being there.
You have to take it as fantasy. It's just, this is a made up place I don't
Yeah.
have to go to, and then it's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can't feel it, then it's fine.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a nice, classy desert island with a nice beach hut. What is the first book you want to take with you?
Don't think this will surprise anyone who's ever spoken to me for more than 5 minutes. My first book is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield, a story of a dual POV. It's exactly what it sounds like. Our Wives Under the Sea. Her wife is a marine biologist, goes down on a submarine, things go wrong, and she does not come back the same as she went down. Not maybe the most like comforting book to take with you to a desert island, but I don't know. I loved these characters so much. And I think when I first read this book, I didn't want to leave them. I really took my time with it because I wanted to stay with these characters. And so it made sense to me that I would bring them with me.
Oh, that's really see. I just think because I always think it's really interesting when you do actually meet characters in a book that you're not rushing to get to the end because you don't want to part ways.
Yeah.
It's very rare that happens to me because usually I'm so desperate to know what happens at the end that I possibly ruin it for myself. If anything, I get even less time with the characters I love
Yeah.
the most. But yeah, it's a nice sensation. I've heard you talk about this book before, and it's just occurred to me to ask. You mentioned obviously one of the wives goes under the sea,
Hmm.
she comes back not quite the same. Is it very much in the kind of horror fantasy element, or do you think there's a wider metaphor for, I don't know, people's relationships deteriorating and you becoming different people?
I think what's really interesting that you mentioned the horror side of it, because I've talked about this book a lot, and Cara, who we both know, who I believe has just done an episode, when she read it,
She
she
has.
said to me, she said she was really glad I hadn't recommended it as a horror. And in my mind, I was like, why would I recommend this book as a horror? And I sat and realized it's because it's a horror, but I've never thought of it in that way. To me, this is very much a character driven love story that happens to be tangled up in grief and horror. And it blew my mind to think that other people think of this just as a horror book. Because to me, that's a side thing, like that this horrific thing
Yeah.
happens. I think also maybe because we don't get a lot of information about what happens per se. So I didn't think of it as a horror in that way. But I
Mhm.
think there's definitely more of a metaphor at play. And I think Julia Armfield writes about grief in a really interesting way, because this
Mm.
is grieving before a fact. You're grieving a relationship and a person and an
Mhm.
idea. So there's definitely more at play than just the horrible thing that I apparently thought of as a B plot.
I suppose it's good when something transcends the genre it gets pigeonholed in, because I think there are some of the really big books that arguably you could say are fantasy or sci-fi. They tend to find other audiences that wouldn't read those books
Yeah.
because the plot makes it come out of that. Yeah, it's interesting one just because I am a bit of a baby. So if it's not properly a horror book, I might be able to be brave enough to read it because I've already started using it as a reference to things, even though I've not
Excellent.
read it.
The
So
agenda is happening.
my my husband and I have just started watching Supernatural for the first time.
Oh, wow.
And it was an episode where one of them, I don't know, he's been taken over by a ghost, classic supernatural stuff. But the other characters don't know, and he walks in, and I'm just like, oh, and I was just like, I almost said to my husband, who has never read this book, let alone because of the fact I've never read it, and then it's just, oh, I've under the sea, and I'm like, that's really strange. You've not even read the book. You don't know.
No, it's a great example of like comes back wrong trope. And I also think it should just be used as a reference point for everyone, even if just to
Yes.
get everyone talking about it so everyone eventually has to read it. But yeah, it's not too scary. I think that I think you'd be fine with it.
That's good then. Okay, I might have to probably not read it when I'm going to be on my own because yeah, I'm very easy. Agatha Christie books scare me if I'm reading them on my own.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Probably wait till there's someone else around.
Yes, moral support. Okay, so Our Wives Under the Sea. Is that the first of that sort of genre, or are you skipping around in genres for the rest of the
I
books?
I think because I take this stuff very seriously, I think I've tried to spread around a lot. So I think that might be the only one of its kind, really, in my
Okay,
list.
intriguing. What is the second book you'll be taking with you?
So my second book, speaking of reading stuff when you're on your own, my second book is I Might Regret This by Abbi Jacobson. So Abbi Jacobson is a writer, actor, comedian who, after her first big queer breakup, went on a little road trip from New York to LA on her own. And I Might Regret This is the diaries that she kept along the way. So it's also got like illustrations and it's got playlists and everything that she did. And so much of this book is about not just like coming to terms with being alone, but learning to be on your own. And
Mm.
this is my comfort book, 100%. This book has traveled with me. This book has just been by my side. I used to just have this book in my bag all the time, just in case I needed it. So it feels like a perfect book to make sure I've got with me if I'm on my own on the desert island.
I've never actually heard of that. I love the idea of documenting a road trip through sort of multimedia of journal entries and music
Yeah.
and I suppose pictures and things. That sounds like a really. I think I'd love to do that just about any of my trips, really,
Yeah, just
regardless
anything.
of the context. Yeah. Yeah, but that sounds like really interesting. So it's non-fiction. Does she get a lot into, I don't know, different aspects of her life? Is there a lot of reflection, or is it just, or is it a big mixed pop?
It's definitely a lot of reflection. She talks a lot about stuff to do with her childhood and her relationships with her parents. And she talks a lot about this relationship that she had and then the subsequent breakup. She talks a lot about the shows that she's made, like Broad City being her biggest show and how that got made. So she does zip around a lot, but the focus is then on her going and staying at all of these little B&Bs or trying to go to these new cities and towns on her own and be cool with the fact that she's on her own and everyone else is all paired up in her mind.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I suppose I've not really thought about it that much, but it is something you do have to learn how to do. I remember the first time I went out to eat a meal by myself, like to eat lunch at work in public.
It feels huge, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's a good time to be a reader because no one looks quite if you're on your own doing something and you're not reading, maybe you don't look strange, but you definitely look like there are people like, what are you doing? But if you take a book with you, you're like, that person's cool. They're reading by themselves.
Yeah, you look like you've got something about you rather than you're just
Yeah, you've
sitting
got
on
a
your
purpose.
own. Yeah. Yeah, I think because I'm a big fan of being on my own. I really enjoy it. I've traveled on my own. I like to do stuff, but it did take me quite a while to get there. And I think reading this book was a lot of, oh, I've had that exact thought, even down to then other unrelated anxieties. There's a whole 3 pages or something where she can't sleep because there's a little light on the TV. And it was just one of those moments where I felt really seen. I think I read this book for the first time on a plane and it is almost entirely highlighted of just me like furiously, like I feel represented by this book.
Yeah, that definitely we've literally got a sticker on the standby light on our TV in our room.
No, because that will keep me up.
It irritates.
Yeah.
If anyone showers like right before bed and has to leave the extractor fan on,
I've got no chance. I'll be up all night.
It drives me insane. Yeah, that's really, really funny. I think I'm getting that. I like being on my own terms. I think when I'm choosing my alone time, that's great.
Yeah.
When I feel like it's being forced upon me and I feel like I need social interaction, which granted isn't often, but like I do like to talk to people. I just talk to the dog. Like I'm never truly on my own because there's always a dog.
Yeah. Yeah, my cat achieves that. I think she's sick of me sometimes as well. But yeah.
And I like the idea that you just kept it with you at all times. I don't think I've ever had a book where like I would take it anywhere. I've reread a lot of books, but I don't think I've just taken one anywhere.
Neither had I until this. And this is also only there's now 2, but this is the first audiobook I ever listened to all the way through as well. Because I once just listened to it on a plane because I knew I didn't have the capacity to read it, but I still wanted the book with me because she narrates it herself. Yeah, I've never had a book like that until I read this one.
It's always the best kind. The nonfiction narrated by the author, I think, is usually one of the best audiobooks because they know what they meant with what they've said. I think it's different if it's like an author narrating a fiction book because I think narrating fiction is a massively underrated skill and I don't think everybody is good at it. And okay, I'm assuming you're going to be taking your copy with all the illustrations
my
with
copy
all
that
the
is
highlights and annotations.
Absolutely. That's my special copy. That one's coming with me.
Great. I love an annotated book. It makes my day if I'm in a secondhand bookstore and I can find it and I pick up an annotated copy book. Sometimes that'll be enough just to make me buy it because it's annotated.
But then I think I'd be mortified if anyone accidentally bought any of my annotated books with my weird little scribbles in them.
Yeah, I've still got a couple of the books that I really enjoyed studying at school, in secondary school, when I first got into, and I really love the idea that they might still be teaching those texts when my kids go to school, and then they're going to take like my copy of Inspector Calls with all of my sarcastic edgy comments about politics in the cult.
Oh, I hope so.
Margins. I'm just like, oh, well, if they are not going to be impressed with.
Not at all, no. Or maybe they will and they'll just be
Yeah.
like, wow, how cool is she?
I said no one about my 12-year-old self ever.
No, me neither, but I can dream.
Being cool in secondary school is highly overrated. I think you have to grow into your cool.
Oh, I don't trust anyone who like says that high school was the best time of their life, because that just means that they were really popular.
Yeah, always an interesting barometer.
Yeah.
Okay, the third book on your list, what are you going to be taking with you?
We've actually reached another perfect segue there, because we are going with a childhood favorite.
And I love a childhood favorite for the list.
It has to be done, I think. I was going to say because it's a comforting thing, but actually this must have sparked who I am as a person. My childhood favorite book is not a comforting book. And it is The Illustrated Mum by Jacqueline Wilson.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my favorite. I liked all Jacqueline Wilson, but that was my favorite one. Not sure what that says about little Rory, but The Illustrated Mum being about two girls and their mum, who is, as an adult, I now know bipolar and had a drinking problem. And as a child was just a little bit unreliable and a bit edgy. And it's about these sisters and it's about their relationship with their mum. And it's particularly the younger one, who I think is called Dolphin, but I can't remember now. And I just know that I love
it's a Jacqueline Wilson novel.
Yeah, they're called Dolphin and Star, I believe. And I just know that I loved this book as a kid. And so I think that I have a tendency when I'm on my own to lose a bit of sense of self. So if I'm on a desert island, I'm going to get there. And I think a great way for me to reconnect with that is a childhood favorite book. And I think this is the one.
Jacqueline Wilson. I'm actually really intrigued. I feel like I need to speak to some of my international friends as to whether Jacqueline Wilson cut through in an international way, because she is like a staple cornerstone of middle grade, secondary school age reading in the UK, I think.
From what I can gather, I don't think she did, because when I lived in Canada, I don't remember any of my friends really knowing.
Her
They
books
kind
are
of
very
knew
British.
Yeah, they knew some of the girls in Loved Ones, but I think that was more from the TV show than the books. But yeah, I think she's a bit too British, Jacqueline Wilson.
Yeah, there's a lot of very British references in it. And I think she's such an interesting sort of children's book author, because she doesn't actually shy away from the difficult topics. Like you just said, it's got like a mother with a mental disability and like a disorder and all sorts of things. And I never really got into Jacqueline Wilson, I think, and I'm only just like diagnosing this myself. I think because I had so much going on myself as a child, I didn't really want to read about kids who had a lot of their own stuff going on.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, I think part of me thinks I did it in a little bit of a, like, the same way that people used to love Jeremy Kyle. There was a part of me being like, someone's got it worse than I have.
Yeah, that's always a good way to go about it. Whereas me, I was just like, you know what? Wizards. That's what I need in my life.
Yeah, there are different ways to deal with the world around you. You can embrace it or you can escape it.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, Jacqueline Wilson, the few books of hers that I had read, they definitely don't shy away from those topics, and they actually deal with them in a really human way that I think probably makes a lot of young people feel like really seen. Like a lot of people will know Tracy Beaker with, foster kids and that sort of thing. And God, there was one, I think it was called Kiss. And I think genuinely this is like the most 10 or 11-year-old thing to do. I think I only read it because someone told me there was kissing in it. And that's basically
that still works on me now, to be fair.
Yeah, but there's kissing in it, Rory, so you need to
I'm
read
all in,
it.
yeah. I think Jacqueline Wilson is interesting in that way, though. I think, there are probably a lot of things that people can relate to and a lot of things that they can't, and she doesn't shy away from the big, bad, scary stuff, but I think probably in a way that it is still kind of child-friendly. It's not talking down to you about the big, bad, scary stuff, but it's also not creating too much of a horror.
Yeah, I think it's normalizing it, because she also deals with stuff that most kids would deal with, not just like trauma and quite difficult topics, but also just things like moving house or financial difficulties
Yeah.
or
Or there's like it was about
new
like a
siblings.
there's one about like parents of a child of divorce, which I guess like a lot of kids are
Yeah.
dealing with that. So I think, I've met Jacqueline Wilson a couple of times because she was the chancellor of my
Oh,
university. And so very interesting to hear her talk about the way that she writes as well, because the woman's written like over 100 books.
she is prolific. Yeah.
Wild. I don't really know how anyone has that many ideas, but
And she also has the illustration style of her books. I don't know the name of the illustrator, but like, I think the duo is like as iconic as a sort of Roald Dahl and Quentin Blake, or
yeah, I think it's Nick Sherritt.
Julia Donaldson or
Yeah.
Julia Donaldson and Axel Scheffler. Yeah, I feel like those author illustrator combos where you see it and you just know it's a
Yeah.
product of those two things is great. She also looks like an absolutely fascinating. Is she as fascinating as she looks? Whenever I see her all the picture, I'm like, she looks so cool.
Whenever I've heard her speak, she's always seemed really interesting. She just seemed like the kind of person that you could just listen to her talk about probably anything and she'd be quite interesting. I know she's not sure if she's maybe said sketchy things. I try and not think about anything that a beloved children's author has ever said, barring the exceptions. But
Yeah.
it's easier sometimes.
It's if there was some rumors going around about Daniel Handler a few years ago, and that was a bit like, oh, and then nothing ever seemed to really come of it. And then I actually met him recently at a literature festival, and I was like, after meeting him, I was like, oh, he was so nice and so funny. I'm like, it's just really difficult because it's you just don't want something to be true more so than whether you want to believe whether it is or not. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always very tricky, especially when it's all tied up with nostalgia. But
Yeah. But for the purposes of this, I'm going to just, she wrote the book and that's fine. It can be
well,
that when I'm on a desert
without
island, I don't
having
need to be thinking about the politics of it.
yeah, and I mean, without going into, I think there's a difference between having those views but keeping them quietly to yourself, and having those views and weaponizing your power to
Yeah.
do do things about them. They are two very different approaches.
They are.
Yes, there we are, just over halfway through. What is the penultimate fourth book of your list?
So this one was actually the hardest one for me to choose. This was actually fifth in the lineup of how I've chosen them. And I was really struggling. And I've gone with a play, which has surprised even me. So I am choosing Travesties, which is a play by Tom Stoppard.
I've heard of him.
I love this play. I saw this play about 4 or 5 times when it was on the West End. I just really liked it. It tells the story of, I think his name's Henry Carr, who was a real person, but it's a fictionalized version of his life. And he is telling stories about being in Zurich in 1917 during the First World War and interactions he was having with people like James Joyce and Lenin and Tristan Tzara, who was one of the founders of Dadaism. And it's a really absurd play. It's completely nonsensical intentionally, and it's so much fun. And I've chosen this mostly because I think I would have a great time on my own in my little beach house acting this play out. Doing all the parts, doing all the voices, having a great time, making costumes for myself out of whatever I have. I think it would be a joy, and I would just really enjoy the silliness of it.
I think that's a perfectly valid reason to choose it. That just reminds me of, I think I've told the story I've told about this on the podcast before. Taskmaster a few years ago had a challenge where they gave all the different contestants a different part in a script. And then they had to record themselves doing that part, but by themselves in the specific position. So they could layer the videos on top of each other. So it was one complete play.
Oh, that
But
sounds
what
so
they
fun.
didn't tell one of the contestants was they got him to do all of the parts, whereas everybody else only had to do one. So there's one that's got all of them on it, and then there's one version of it that's just all the same guy. I think it was Richard Herring they made do it all.
Oh, that's incredible. That's going to be me with Travesty. It's just doing the whole play, like a little one-man band. It's going to be amazing.
Exactly. Perfect. And yeah, I do love a play, and I do actually think you can get quite a lot out of reading a play. Tom Stoppard, he has written lots. Is he the one who wrote Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and Rosencrantz are dead?
I
I
am,
think
with
so.
a certain level of confidence, going to say yes. And if it's wrong, I'm going to ask you to take this bit out.
Okay.
I'm almost
Just
certain that the answer is yes. And it will, if
I
not, it'll be a
I
really
feel like
jarring cut for everyone.
I've heard an interview with Tom Stoppard as well, because he's quite a prolific
Mhm.
writer. He's written quite a lot of plays, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And I think he was being talked to from a point of creative process, writing process, and that sort of thing, which is always really interesting. I know it's probably something you're very interested in as well,
That
as
would be very
someone who
interesting.
likes writing. So. Yeah, because I find productivity really interesting. And I also find it really interesting when it comes into contact with creatives,
Mm.
really prolific creators, but not just creators who make a lot of stuff, but make a lot of really good stuff.
Well, that
Like,
people can churn out a lot of stuff. It's when it's
yeah,
stuff that is good and that people like, that's the difference.
yeah,
So yeah, it's similar to what I was saying about Jacqueline Wilson, like how someone can have that many solid ideas and keep them going and keep doing a good job with them.
yeah,
I simply do not know. I am in awe.
yeah. It's definitely like it seems like everything they touch, or it's all like gold dust
Yeah.
almost. It's like, how do people. Yeah, it's amazing. But yeah, I like the idea of you acting out your one woman play
Oh yeah.
of. I'm sorry, you're gonna have to tell me the time period, like that. So it's being in experience in Zurich in
It's
1917
1917
during the
during the
beginning of
First World War. Yeah, in Zurich, and it's incredible. He's, like, hanging out with Lenin, he's getting in arguments with James Joyce, it's
wow, Zurich was where it was at.
yeah, this is also where I learned about Dadaism. I didn't know anything about it until then, and then I spent the next, like, 3 years of my life obsessed with Dadaism in that very neurodivergent hyperfixation-y way. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it when you stumble on something and it can be so small and niche. And then there's like an alarm bell in the back of my brain that goes, welcome to your new obsession.
Yeah.
This is your life for the
You can
next few
feel it
years.
happening in the moment. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's just like this weird sort of like spidey sense in the background. Like literally, I said we've started watching Supernatural.
Mhm.
We've started watching it, and I'm being tempered by the fact I'm not allowed to watch it by myself. We have to watch it together because we're watching it together.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'd have finished it by now because I'm on maternity leave and
Yeah.
and I've got a lot of time on my hands. But I do, every time I come across something like this, especially something that was out when I was younger, but I didn't get into it then. I'm like, wow, it's a good job that I didn't find this when I was 13, because my grades would have been terrible.
Oh, yeah.
I would have done no work.
And also, not just that, like, I would have been even more annoying than I already was at 13 if I'd known about this thing. Yeah.
So it would have been my entire personality.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I love that. It's an incredibly niche time period play that's random. Yeah. Like it. Very.
Yeah.
Okay. We're on your fifth and final book. What will you be taking with you?
This is the wildest of wild cards for me. I am choosing Moby Dick for my fifth book. It's a wild card for
Okay.
me because I've never read it. However,
It's a bold choice.
I know in my heart of hearts that I am going to love this book. It's an unhinged novel. Everyone knows this. It's ridiculous. It goes off on a million tangents. I saw the musical of Moby Dick in 2020 and I was obsessed with it. I know that I'm going to love this book, but this book is so big that it stresses me out. And I get overwhelmed by the idea of reading large books. But when am I going to read this if not when I am stranded with only 5 books? It's the perfect time. And if I don't read it then, quite frankly, it's not made for me.
Never going to. Yeah, some of the really chunky classics, the ones that are known for it is interesting. That's the same feeling I had about The Count of Monte Cristo, because it was
Mhm.
massive. And I was like, I did read it eventually because I set myself the challenge of reading it within I think it was a month or something,
Oh,
which
wow.
was still quite difficult to achieve because
Yeah.
it's 1,200 pages.
Yeah, that is ambitious.
But yeah, I had a vibe that I was going to love it. And then I did. I think you're probably right on this one.
Oh, there we go.
But yeah, I think you're probably right on this one because I knew I was going to love Count of Monte Cristo, and then I did when I read it. I think you're onto something.
I can tell that it's got everything that I'm going to love. It's ridiculous. It goes off on tangents. It's deeply unhinged. It's basically just the ramblings of a ridiculous man. And I am going to love this book when I finally pick it up.
Maybe. I don't know if they do this. So I bought a broken up version of the Count of Monte Cristo. They split it into 4 or 5 volumes that are slim and a little bit more manageable. Maybe if someone's done that with Moby Dick, where they split it into a couple of volumes, not only can you break it down into easier books, but you can count it as 2 or 3 or even 4 books towards your overall count as opposed to just one.
I genuinely might look in to see if anyone's done this, to see if make it more manageable. I'm just scared of really big books. They're terrifying. And they're heavy.
It does feel, heavy is one of the problems. It does feel, I don't know, because I think I love a really big book because I like the sort of sense of achievement. I also like really getting immersed in a story and a world, and I like the sort of all-ranging narrative. But you do want to feel like you're making progress, and there is a point since the middle third where it just feels like you're treading water, but you're making absolutely no progress.
Which is definitely going to happen in Moby Dick when I get to the sort of 80 pages describing the different types of whales. And I feel like I just don't need the visual representation of that in front of me.
Yeah. You never know. It might like unlock a new obsession with just whales, just generally.
I already love whales.
Whales are pretty cool.
They're very cool. This is the thing. I'm going to love this book. I just need someone to make me read it.
Yeah, I would actually really like to read Moby Dick as well eventually, because it's one of those, it feels like you have to. It's on the list of 100 books you should read before you die. Fun fact for anyone listening, I'm sure you as a whale fan will know, but I only learnt this the other day on QI that orcas aren't apparently whales, they're dolphins.
I actually didn't know that.
The killer whale, Free Willy, apparently they're like a type of dolphin, and you can tell because of the shape of them and their arc. I don't know. QI has been known to be wrong before, so if there are any whale experts in my listenership who want to correct me, then they're welcome to.
Also, just in general, if any whale experts are listening, please hit me up, get in touch.
Once they pointed it out and they said, oh, look at the shape and the dorsal fin and all that sort of thing, I was like, you know what? It does look more like a dolphin than it does a whale. They are a different shape,
yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, really, it was one of those, I don't know, I feel like I learned something today. I was quite happy with that one. Maybe what you can do is when you do read Moby, eventually you can reward yourself with a really pretty edition of it, because there are some really pretty editions.
There are. And then I feel like I really would deserve a treat after I finish that. Maybe that can be my motivation. Yeah. Or maybe I'll hate it and I'll never want to read it again, in which case I'll buy a nice copy of something else instead.
I once heard someone, I think I read, like, it was like a meme online, it was saying people who attack readers for having like special editions of books or keeping books that they don't like that much. It's all because if you're a hunter, people mount the things you hunt on their wall. If you demolish a really big book, you need some kind of trophy to acknowledge.
Yeah, so that's my equivalent of like a whale head mounted on the wall.
Yeah, you get the special edition on its own little flint.
Absolutely.
Very fascinating list with quite a lot of water and travel and journeys interwoven in, which I really love. I like it when they all look like they're sort of cohesive. If you wouldn't mind, could you recap all 5 just for listeners so they can quickly scribble down their shopping lists for when they hit up their local independent bookstore?
Yeah, so we had Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield, I Might Regret This by Abbi Jacobson, The Illustrated Mum by Jacqueline Wilson, Travesties by Tom Stoppard, and Moby Dick by Herman Melville. It's my top 5.
I love it. It is a very you list, and I don't know why, and I can't think, but I love the idea that if someone had given me that list of books and said, do you think I might have put this list? I might have been able to guess you.
I'm choosing to take that as a compliment.
Yeah, absolutely is.
Yeah.
It's an eclectic and interesting mix of books. I think there's a lot to, I don't know, think about with all of them, especially, I think it's, they're really good ones. I love it. Again, I would have been able, though, ironically, on the flip side, I probably wouldn't have been able to guess any of them if you'd have asked me to come up with the top of my head.
No, I did. I took myself by surprise with a couple of them, but yeah. Ask me again tomorrow and I'd
Awesome.
probably have a different list, but that's the beauty of books, I think.
That tends to be the case. I feel like there's some people that I did list with right at the beginning of the podcast in 2021 that probably would want to redo their lists now because they've read all sorts since then and they've become different people. But it's like a time capsule. You can come back to this episode in a few years' time and see what you think.
Yeah, we'll see how I get on.
Are there any honorable mentions that you almost wanted to add but didn't quite?
There are. Like I said, Travesties was the hardest one for me to nail down. And I had 3 possibilities for that 5th spot. So one of the others was Useless Magic, which is the Florence Welch of Florence and the Machine. It's just a book. A lot of it's lyrics and again, some illustrations and poetry. And it's just a kind of a collection. And I very nearly went with this because I thought it might be nice to have something with me that I could dip in and out of rather than, but in the end, I don't know what it was that meant that I didn't quite choose that one. It was a very strong contender. Yeah, I like those little, I'm not a big poetry person generally, but I like a little book that you don't have to focus all your attention on. You can just weave in and out of. And then I also almost went with, and this was a relatively recent read of mine, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, before I decided it was far too depressing to take with me when I was on my own. I enjoyed this book far more than I ever thought I was going to, especially considering it is a very long book and it is part of a series, and these are not generally things that I do very well. But I think it was a very twisty, turny book that I think I could reread a lot of times and pick something new up out of it every time. So it was a possibility, but in the end, the idea of just doing theatre on my own won.
That's the other one.
Yeah.
The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is quite an interesting one because I have read that and not really I have read it and it's not really my usual read. Generally, I'm not massively into sort of thrillers, but I did quite like the mystery involved with that because I was trying to, it's one of those good kinds of mystery where if you're paying attention, you might be able to figure it out yourself by the end of it. I don't like those mysteries that sort of just pull a rabbit out of a hat at the end and go, yes, but you could never have known because of this secret connection.
No, and I also don't like ones that are really obvious from the word go. And I think this one it's fun because there's a couple of times along the way that you think you've worked it out and then you haven't. And I pride myself on being able to guess plot twists pretty quickly. And I think I only figured this out about 15 to 20 pages before they did. But I also I really liked the characters. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed that book, but I haven't read the rest of the series yet. I don't know.
I think I decided not to proceed with it after I read and enjoyed the first one, but I was like, if it continues in this same vein, I may struggle.
Yeah, it is. It's quite intense read, which I think is also part of why in the end I was like, do I want something this with me? Yeah.
I'm intrigued by the Florence Welch book that you mentioned, just because I didn't know she'd written one. And I've always wanted to, I don't know, I really want to like poetry, but I've yet to find poetry that really gets me.
I think that's the thing. I do
in that way.
Yeah, I like poetry as a concept, and I haven't found like my poetry book yet. But I know that when I do, it'll be great.
Yeah.
But haven't got it yet. But this one's an interesting one. Like I say, there's some lyrics in there, and some of them are like first drafts of lyrics before they became the finalized version of the songs that we already know. And there's lots of illustrations, and my copy is signed. So if I were to take it, it would have to be that one. But it's an interesting one. It's a very beautiful book, visually and thematically, I think. It's very nice. It's just very pleasant, very Florence.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine because she's got a whole vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. I like seeing song lyrics in development as well. And because even though I'm not a musician, I do not possess even
No.
a crumb of musical talent. I cannot carry or detect a
No,
tune to save
same.
my life. I do love listening to music and I do love music. And my husband is much more musically talented than I am. And he writes songs and I like seeing the sort of processes and iterations. And I've got other friends who are musicians and it's quite I do like it as a form of storytelling and reading. It's one of the reasons why, and I don't know how well this is going to go. It's one of the reasons why I actually like Taylor Swift because I actually think,
I love Taylor Swift, so I'm the right person
yeah,
to say this to.
yeah. So despite, I don't know, 'cause I know that some of them are as poppy and catchy and whatnot. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I know some people don't like it.
Yeah.
She does know how to effectively tell a very layered and full story in just the space of one song. In very few words, she can tell you exactly what the relationship between these two characters in her song
And I
have
think,
been through. You can let you know about their history and how it
yeah.
starts, ends,
And I think
all of
does a
it.
really interesting thing, which I think is also important in storytelling in general, which is something that feels very specific, but also manages to feel very universal. There
Mm.
can be a very specific situation being told, but as a storyteller, somehow she can manage to make it feel universal and relatable. And I think it's a really interesting thing in songwriting specifically, because you want music to feel relatable to absolutely anybody who's listening to it, but also you have to tap into the like specificity of it. And I
Yeah.
think that Florence is also
Make
very good
everyone
at that
feel
in a
like
lot
it's
of ways.
specifically about
Yeah,
them.
exactly. You want to listen to a song and be like, oh my God, this is about me. How did they know? And it's like,
So I saw.
and to be able to do that, I think is a really incredible gift of a storyteller and of a
Mm.
musician. And yeah, but I think I agree about like, watching the ways that song lyrics change, because sometimes it's like you'll read it and to me I'm like, why would you get rid of that? That's amazing. But there was something that sparked in their brain that decided it wasn't the best version. Yeah.
Yeah. I read Dolly Parton's Songteller book where she talks about all of her song, like a bunch of her song lyrics and the stories behind them
Oh,
and that sort of thing. And it's a really gorgeous book as well. It's got really gorgeous pictures in it. But another one where it's quite good to be able to see what those lyrics mean to the person who wrote them as well, because I think everyone can search their own,
yeah.
I don't know, story onto onto a lot of music and stuff. So yeah, think that's really interesting. And Florence and the Machine, it's funny. I think it's one of those artists that know a lot of their songs, but I don't know that I know a lot of them, if that makes any sense. Like
Yeah.
I was just, I disturbed is too strong a word. I was incredibly shocked to find out how many Little Mix songs I knew.
And every single one of them's a
Until they were
banger as well.
listed to
Yeah.
me. Yeah, I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize that this was Little Mix. Same with Dua Lipa. And my husband recently found out that he knows far more Girls Aloud songs than he thought he did.
This is everyone you're listing is just someone that I love, an icon. But yeah, I think, again, I think that music that gets in your brain that you don't even realize is getting in your brain,
Yeah.
incredible stuff.
Yeah. It's great. It's definitely a skill. I think anyone who thinks, I've got so many people who think, oh, anyone can make it in music and stuff these days. It's not, there's like a knack. There's definitely there's something, there's got to be something. It's always really interesting. But like, we could go down a whole rabbit hole
Yeah.
with getting
Like,
into
we're
talking about the
definitely
music
going off on a
industry.
tangent, but yeah.
Anyway, it was an amazing list. I really like great honorable mentions as well. So you've got some great backups if one of them happens to go awry. If listeners wanted to find out more about your book recommendations and the kind of books you love, where could they find you?
They can find me on Instagram at, which I can mostly. It's just very hard to find a book related Instagram handle if your name is Rory, because everyone is doing the Rory Gilmore reading challenge. Rory can't read on Instagram.
Okay, and definitely go and check Rory out in those places. I do. Sorry, I don't know why you say I can read.
I
Just made
can.
me think
I
of
promise.
that lawyer from Lockdown who got the cat filter on his face, and he's like, I'm not a cat.
That's exactly me. I can read. I can, mostly.
Okay. Go and check out Rory at Rory Can't Read on Instagram. If you want to check out the podcast, subscribe wherever podcasts are found and follow us at Books to Last Pod on Instagram as well. It's the only social media the the podcast keeps, because I really, and even that is resentfully done. I do it for you listeners. I don't do it for me. I don't like social media at all anymore. But that's where we're at in life. Rory, thank you so much for joining me. It's been amazing.
Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun.
Great. And I'm so glad, I'm so glad we got to do this. It feels like I've wanted to talk about this list with you for ages, and now we have. Yeah, really chuffed. Okay,
All right.
listeners, thank you so much for listening. Rory, thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, bye for now.